You know how they say the holidays bring out the best in people? Well, that's a lie. For me, Christmas will always be the season of terror, and no amount of tinsel or carols will ever change that. It happened 5 years ago. I was 22 then, home for the holidays from college. Life was complicated. My girlfriend Lily and I were on the verge of something serious, but my past, something I never wanted to talk about, was always lurking like a shadow. But let me not get ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. It all began at Birchwood Mall on Christmas Eve. The mall was packed that day. Kids tugged at their parents, pointing at toys they wanted from Santa. Couples strolled hand in hand, pausing to admire the massive Christmas tree in the center of the atrium. I was there for one reason: a last-minute gift for Lily. I wasn't the best boyfriend back then, too wrapped up in my own world, my own struggles. Lily, on the other hand, was perfect, sweet, patient, and way out of my league. I wanted to find something that would show her how much I cared. I wandered through store after store, dodging pushy salespeople and crying toddlers, until I found it: a delicate silver bracelet with tiny, star-shaped charms. It reminded me of the nights we'd spend lying on her rooftop, staring at the sky and dreaming about the future. I had just paid for the bracelet when my phone buzzed. It was Lily. I smiled and typed back, "Sure. Meet you at the food court in an hour?" I slipped the bracelet into my jacket pocket and headed toward the food court. That's when I noticed something odd. A man was standing near the entrance to a small, closed-off wing of the mall. He was tall, with a weathered face and a Santa hat perched awkwardly on his head. He didn't look like he belonged. His clothes were rumpled, and his eyes— there was something about his eyes. They were too intense, too focused. He was staring directly at me. I tried to shake off the unease and kept walking. But as I passed him, he spoke. "You look just like him." The words stopped me cold. My father. He died when I was 10. A car accident. Or at least, that's what my mom told me. But here was this stranger claiming to know him. My mind raced. Who was this guy? How did he know my dad? Before I could ask, he turned and disappeared down the closed-off wing. I stood there, heart pounding, torn between following him and letting it go. Against my better judgment, I followed. The wing was eerily quiet, the festive sounds of the mall fading behind me. Most of the stores here were shuttered, their windows dark and dusty. I called out, but there was no response. The man was gone. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a faint jingling sound, like sleigh bells. It came from a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. At first I thought it was some sort of storage space, but then I saw the photos. Hundreds of them pinned to the walls, scattered across a table. They were of people, shoppers, kids sitting on Santa's lap, families posing by the Christmas tree, and in the center of the table was a photo of me. My mind reeled. How did this stranger have a photo of me? And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the photo, almost hidden by the shadows, was my dad. He looked older, rougher, but it was unmistakably him. My hands shook as I picked up the photo, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Was my father alive? Why would he hide from us? A noise behind me snapped me back to reality. I turned to see the man from before standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here. Who are you? How do you know my father? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you leave, now." His tone left no room for argument, but I wasn't about to let it go. "Tell me the truth, or I swear I'll call the cops." "The truth?" He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Your father. He wasn't the man you think he was. He owed a debt, and when he couldn't pay, he ran. Left you and your mother to deal with the fallout." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father? A liar? A coward? I wanted to deny it, but the stranger's expression told me he wasn't lying. Before I could say anything else, he stepped aside, revealing something behind him that made my heart stop. It was a chair, and tied to it was Lily. Her eyes were wide with fear, her mouth gagged, but the terror in her gaze was unmistakable. What the hell is this? Let her go. You want her to live? Then listen carefully. There's something in this mall. Something your father left behind. You have 1 hour to find it and bring it to me. If you fail... He pulled a knife from his pocket, its blade gleaming in the dim light. Well, let's just say Christmas will be very lonely for you this year. I had no choice. I ran out of the room, my mind racing. What could my father have left behind? I searched every corner of the mall, my panic growing with each passing minute. Then I remembered something. When I was a kid, my dad used to take me to this little candy store on the second floor. He always said it was our special spot. Could that be it? I sprinted to the store, which was now a trendy boutique. I pushed past racks of clothes, ignoring the protests of the staff, and found a small hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was a small metal box. I opened it to find a USB drive and a note. The note was in my father's handwriting. To my son, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I made mistakes, but I did it all to protect you. Keep this safe. Trust no one. Before I could process the words, my phone buzzed. Startled, I pulled it out, half expecting another cryptic message from Lily, or something worse. Instead, it was my friend Chris, a guy I hadn't talked to in years. Chris? I muttered, answering the call. Dude, where are you? I was at the mall earlier and... Listen, I saw something weird. A guy in a Santa hat. He looked sketchy and... Wait, is everything okay? You sound off. My pulse quickened. Chris had seen him too. Chris, I don't have time to explain, but that guy, he's dangerous. What? Dangerous how? He's got Lily. I don't know what's going on, but I found something. Something my dad left behind. Chris was silent for a moment, then said, Your dad? But... I thought... Yeah, so did I snapped. Listen, can you call the cops? Tell them to get to Birchwood Mall now. On it. Just be careful, man. I hung up and stuffed the USB back into the box. Chris's call had jolted me, but it also gave me hope. At least someone knew what was happening. Now I just had to make sure I survived long enough to meet them. But there was something in the note that gave me a clue. A small, handwritten code at the bottom. I quickly realized it was a password. I plugged the USB into a nearby kiosk and accessed the files. What I found was explosive. Evidence of the stranger's crimes, kidnapping, extortion, even murder. I turned the screen toward him. Looks like you've got more to lose than I do. For a moment, he hesitated. And that was all I needed. I grabbed a nearby display stand and swung it at him, knocking the knife out of his hand. Security, alerted by the commotion, rushed in and restrained him. Lily was shaken but unharmed. The police took the stranger away, and I handed them the USB drive. It turned out my father had been involved in a dangerous smuggling operation but had tried to blow the whistle. The USB contained everything he had gathered to expose the group, including the stranger. It wasn't just evidence, it was closure. For years, I had been haunted by questions about my father. This was my answer. A flawed man, but one who tried to make things right in the end. Lily and I never spoke about that day again, but it changed me. I learned to stop running from my past and start appreciating what I had. As for Christmas, well, it's still not my favorite holiday. But every year, I hang a single silver star on my tree. A reminder of the night I almost lost everything and found out who I really was. Christmas has always been my favorite time of the year. The twinkling lights, the warmth of family gatherings, the promise of a fresh start. But 3 years ago, everything changed. Christmas stopped being magical. It became a reminder of the night I almost didn't make it out alive. This story isn't one I share lightly. It's personal, haunting, and it all began in Frostwood Village, a quaint little Christmas town my mom used to bring me to every year as a kid. It was supposed to be a nostalgic trip. At 25, I was juggling a job I hated and a relationship with Emma that felt like it was unraveling faster than I could hold it together. When my mom suggested we visit Frostwood Village for the holidays, I thought, why not? Maybe some of that old holiday spirit could fix everything. Frostwood hadn't changed much since I was a kid. The cobblestone streets were lined with gingerbread-style houses, their windows glowing with warm yellow light. Snow dusted the rooftops and the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. Vendors sold roasted chestnuts and mulled cider, while children skated on a small frozen pond in the center of town. Emma wasn't thrilled about the trip, but she came along anyway. I could tell she was doing it for me, and I appreciated that more than I let on. I had a plan to surprise her with a locket engraved with our initials, a small gesture to show her I still cared. But from the moment we arrived, something felt off. It started small. As we checked into our inn, I noticed an old man sitting in the corner of the lobby, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He wore a battered coat and a scarf that looked like it had seen better days. His eyes followed me as I signed the check-in sheet. When I looked back, he was gone. Emma and I spent the afternoon wandering the village. She seemed to warm up a bit, laughing as I failed miserably at throwing snowballs. But the strange feeling lingered. People in the village were friendly enough, yet their smiles didn't reach their eyes. It was as if they were playing a part, a performance they couldn't stop, even if they wanted to. That night, as we settled into our room, I heard something. A faint whispering sound like the wind carrying a secret. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to find Emma gone. Her side of the bed was cold, her coat missing from the rack. At first, I thought she'd gone for a walk, but when an hour passed with no sign of her, I started to worry. I searched the village, calling her name, but no one had seen her. The friendly smiles of the townsfolk now felt sinister, their eyes darting away whenever I asked about Emma. Desperate, I returned to the inn. That's when I noticed the note. It was tucked under a cup of cold coffee on the bedside table, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Meet me at the old chapel at midnight. Come alone. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of fear and confusion. Who had left the note? Was Emma in danger? The old chapel mentioned in the note was on the outskirts of the village, a decrepit building I remembered from my childhood, a place my mom had always told me to avoid. When midnight came, I bundled up and headed out into the biting cold. The streets were eerily silent, the festive lights casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The chapel loomed ahead, its crooked steeple piercing the starless sky. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Candles flickered on the altar, and in the center of the room stood the old man from the inn. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Frostwood Village isn't what you think it is." I demanded to know where Emma was. He sighed and motioned for me to sit. Reluctantly, I did. He told me a story that sounded like something out of a nightmare. Decades ago, Frostwood Village had been cursed. A group of travelers had gone missing, their bodies never found. The village's prosperity, its charm, it all came at a price. Each year, someone had to be offered to the forest beyond the village, their life exchanged for the town's survival. "This year," he said, "it's her." My heart sank. "Number, there has to be a way to stop this." He hesitated, then handed me a map. "There's a path through the woods to an old clearing. If you're brave enough, you might be able to save her. But be warned, the forest doesn't let go easily." I didn't hesitate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and the map, I plunged into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands. The air grew colder and the whispers returned. louder now, circling me like a chorus of ghosts. After what felt like hours, I reached the clearing. Emma was there, tied to a tree, her face pale but alive. But we weren't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, their voices rising in unison. I shouted at them to stop, but they didn't even look at me. Desperate, I lunged forward, cutting through the ropes binding Emma. As soon as she was free, the chanting stopped. The hooded figures stepped back, and the old man appeared from the darkness. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him was another figure, one I recognized instantly. Before I could process what I was seeing, my phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the suffocating silence. Trembling, I pulled it out and saw an incoming call from my best friend, Nick. "Nick?" I whispered, answering it. But instead of his voice, I heard the same chanting that filled the air moments ago. The hooded figures paused, their heads turning in unison toward the phone in my hand. The call ended abruptly, leaving only a single message on the screen. "You can't save her." My blood ran cold as the figures resumed their ominous chant, and I realized this was far from over. It was my mother. "Mom?" I whispered, disbelief and betrayal warring within me. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I thought if I kept you away, you'd be safe. But the village, it demands blood." The old man spoke. "You can take her place, you know. Offer yourself and the village will spare her." I looked at Emma, then at my mother. My mind raced. Could I do it? Could I sacrifice myself for her? Or was there another way? In that moment, I remembered something the old man had said at the chapel. The forest doesn't let go easily. I grabbed Emma's hand and ran. The hooded figures didn't follow, but the forest seemed alive, its branches clawing at us, roots rising to trip us. The whispers became screams, the air thick with malice. Somehow, we made it out. The village was silent as we stumbled back to the inn, our breaths visible in the icy air. The old man and my mother were gone, and the village seemed different. The lights were dimmer, the warmth gone. Emma and I left Frostwood Village that night and never looked back. We don't talk about what happened, but sometimes, in the dead of winter, I hear the whispers again. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was the locket I had planned to give Emma, now tarnished and cracked, along with a note that simply read, "It's not over." I don't know who sent it, but I haven't slept since. The whispers are louder now, and I swear, when I look out my window at night, I see shadows moving in the trees. I don't know if it's my imagination or if the forest is still calling to me. All I know is this: Frostwood Village isn't on any map anymore. It's as if it never existed. But I'll never forget what happened there, and I'll never forget the choice I had to make. Christmas has always been my refuge. The lights, the songs, the rituals of decorating a tree, they were an escape from the reality of my life. But one December, in a bustling mall packed with shoppers, my safe haven turned into a nightmare I've never been able to forget. I'm not sure where to begin, but maybe it's best to start with who I was before that night. My name is Ryan, and back then I was 24, stuck in a dead-end retail job and struggling to finish a degree I'd lost passion for years ago. My girlfriend Leah was the bright spot in my life, though. She'd always been supportive, even when I was too lost in my own head to reciprocate. That December I had one goal: to get Leah the perfect Christmas present. She deserved it after putting up with me all year. I'd saved up to buy her a bracelet she'd been eyeing for months. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it felt like a tangible way to say, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I decided to go shopping late one evening after work. The mall was beautifully decorated, with twinkling lights strung along the banisters and a massive Christmas tree towering in the center of the atrium. Fake snow fell from hidden machines, adding a whimsical touch. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasting chestnuts from the food court. It should have been a cheerful atmosphere, but something felt off. It was subtle at first, a prickle at the back of my neck, a strange weight to the air. I told myself I was just tired and headed toward the jewelry store. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The crowd seemed wrong. People moved in that familiar holiday rush, arms full of shopping bags, children tugging at their sleeves. But their faces blurred in my mind, as if they were out of focus. I couldn't remember a single person's features. Then there were the mannequins. Every store window was dressed to the nines in festive decor, but the mannequins, they weren't right. Their poses seemed too lifelike, their heads turned slightly in my direction, though I couldn't swear they'd been that way a moment ago. One in particular caught my eye, a child-sized figure holding a candy cane. Its painted smile looked wider than it should have been, almost like it was mocking me. I shook it off. I was letting my imagination run wild. This was just a mall. Nothing bad ever happens in a mall, right? I made it to the jewelry store without further incident and picked out the bracelet. It sparkled under the glass case, a delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped charm. It was perfect. As the cashier boxed it up, I felt a surge of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something right. But as I left the store, the unease returned. The crowd had thinned noticeably, though it was far too early for the mall to be closing. The festive music, which had been blaring from speakers all evening, sounded distorted, like a record being played at the wrong speed. And the mannequins, they were everywhere now. At least it felt that way. Their faces seemed sharper, their eyes more focused, always in my direction. I quickened my pace, heading for the exit. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the end of the corridor, partially obscured by shadows. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in darkness. Something about his stillness unnerved me. Everyone else, the few shoppers who remained, was moving, rushing to finish their errands. But he just stood there, motionless, watching. I tried to ignore him, to convince myself he was just another shopper waiting for someone. But as I turned down another hallway, I saw him again. The same coat, the same hat, standing perfectly still. Panic started to set in. I wasn't imagining this. He couldn't have gotten here before me unless he... No, it didn't make sense. I needed to get out of there. The exit was just ahead, the glass doors reflecting the glowing parking lot beyond. I broke into a jog, clutching the box with Leah's bracelet like it was a lifeline. But as I reached the doors, they didn't open. I waved my hand in front of the sensor. Nothing. I pushed against the glass, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the mall itself had locked me in. Behind me, the distorted Christmas music grew louder. I turned and saw the man in the hat standing in the middle of the atrium. He was closer now, his face still obscured. And he wasn't alone. The mannequins had moved. They were no longer in their window displays. They stood in a loose circle around the atrium, their blank eyes fixed on me. One of them, the child-sized one, raised its hand and pointed at me. My heart pounded as I backed away, searching for another exit. There was a service door near the food court. I ran for it, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The door was marked "Employees Only," but I didn't care. I yanked it open and slipped inside. The hallway beyond was stark and industrial, a sharp contrast to the festive decor of the mall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls. I ran without thinking, just trying to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was happening out there. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Leah. "Where are you?" My hands were shaking as I typed back. "At the mall. Something's wrong." Her reply came almost instantly. "Ryan, you need to leave now." "I'm trying," I typed. "The exits are locked." There was a long pause before her next message. "They won't let you leave, not until you give them what they want." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" But she didn't respond. I reached the end of the hallway and found myself in a storage area filled with holiday decorations. Fake trees, boxes of ornaments, strands of lights. It should have been comforting, a reminder of the season's joy. Instead, it felt oppressive, the shadows between the boxes hiding unseen threats. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. The screen said Leah, but when I answered, all I heard was static. Then, faintly, a voice. "Come back to the atrium." I froze. It wasn't Leah's voice. It was deeper, colder, and it sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to throw the phone away, to run and never look back, but something compelled me to return. Maybe it was the hope that Leah would somehow be there, that I could still make sense of this nightmare. The atrium was empty when I got back. The mannequins were gone and the man in the hat had vanished. The distorted music had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment I thought I was alone. Then I saw it. The Christmas tree in the center of the atrium, its lights blinking erratically. Beneath it was a small box wrapped in shiny red paper with a gold bow. It hadn't been there before. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't. I knelt and picked up the box. It was light, almost weightless. The tag read, "To Ryan." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was Leah's bracelet, now tarnished and twisted, as if it had been burned. Beneath it was a note written in the same handwriting as the tag. "Merry Christmas." I don't remember much after that. Somehow I made it out of the mall. The doors opened easily this time, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My car was the only one left in the parking lot. I drove home in a daze, clutching the bracelet like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. When I got to my apartment, Leah was waiting for me. She didn't ask where I'd been or why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. She just hugged me and said, "I'm glad you're safe." But I wasn't. I'm still not. The bracelet sits in a drawer now, wrapped in layers of cloth, but I swear I can hear it sometimes. A faint jingling, like bells in the distance. And when I close my eyes, I see the man in the hat, his shadow stretching toward me. Christmas used to be my refuge. Now it's a reminder that some gifts should never be unwrapped.